About a year and a half ago, I think if you were to ask anyone what the most boring provincial election was going to be in Canada, they would, without a doubt, say British Columbia, because it just seemed like it was going to be another default walkover for an incumbent NDP government, and there wasn't really that much to say. Maybe the BC Conservatives grab a couple seats, the BC United, after they changed their name from the BC Liberals, have slipped a bit, but it would just be an election that just sort of shows us in a holding pattern. Yeah, maybe some things are new, but we're not going to see the real results of those things until next election. But then BC Premier David Eby decided to do and say as many stupid things as he possibly could over this last year. And we actually have a real provincial race on our hands now, to the point where it looks like it's narrowing down to a race purely between the BC NDP and the BC Conservative Party. And to talk about this today, I have on Bryan Breguet, who not only is a guy who likes looking at polls. He runs the polling site Too Close to Call, a professor at the University of Langara, and also the BC Conservatives candidate for Vancouver Langara. So thanks for being on the show today, Bryan, and I thought you would have some unique insights for what's going on with David Eby.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. Love the show and love the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like obviously you're partisan, I'm partisan too, but I don't think that actually holds us back from being able to just look at David Eby's performance and be able to say what is going on wrong right now. Like I don't exactly want to give him advice to like digging himself out of this hole. That's where my bias comes in. But there is something quite incredible about somebody who within a year's time has moved from being close to 50% in the polls. This was actually just back in January, as you would remember it, where there was actually the fear that the NDP could potentially win 100% of the seats in British Columbia. And now we are at the stage where, depending on the poll you look at, either it's narrowing between the NDP and the Conservatives, or the Conservatives are even on top of the NDP, both in popular vote as well as the seat count. So in the last 3 months, why would you say that we've seen this really tight narrowing in the polls? Like, why are the BC Conservatives finally catching a moment here?
So I think there are really two factors. The first one is David Eby is a lot more radical than John Horgan, right? So John Horgan won in 2017, won really big in 2020, mostly thanks to COVID, but he was, pretty well liked. I mean, even from people like me on the right of the spectrum, where he was this moderate, classic NDP, blue collar NDP, not the woke urban type. And he was doing an okay job with public finance, at least for the first 2 or 3 years. So I think when David Eby took over, he benefited from the good numbers and the good management from John Horgan. So, but now that David Eby has been the premier for a while, we start seeing more of who he is and how the province is going. So that's the first factor. The second one, and probably the biggest one, is the fact that British Columbians now have an option. Before the BC Conservatives came up, and actually, we're now organized. We have not a full platform, but we have a program. We have candidates. We have 2 MLAs. Now, before we did this, there was no real opposition in BC. BC United, or BC Liberals from Kevin Falcon, were pretty much trying to do the Erin O'Toole strategy of being as centrist as possible without, touching any hot topic. They agree with the NDP on decriminalization. They agree with the NDP on SOGI and radical gender ideology. And the examples, I have many of those. So if you
Except
don't offer
until
an
yesterday.
alternative,
I was going to say, except until yesterday when they actually voted with the BC Conservatives on protecting women's sports from biological men, and now suddenly they want to be on the right side of history with the more, I don't know, it's not even socially conservative, but just socially like common sense positions. But the problem is that they have way too long of a history of being exactly like the NDP for this to feel like anything but just an about face on their part. But like, here's another interesting thing, and now I kind of want to dig into the specific polling that we see coming out of British Columbia. But I think one of the biggest factors right now helping the BC Conservatives, because as you know, the BC Conservative name was basically just reserved by a party who was running a few candidates every election to make sure that they didn't lose it. But after the collapse of social credit, naturally the Liberals became the Big Ten party. But one of the biggest reasons why the BC Conservatives are being taken seriously, not just getting like 2% of the vote, is because there's a situation federally where the BC like the Liberal and NDP brands are just mud at this point. Nobody likes the federal Liberals and the NDP, and now Pierre Poilivre, depending on the poll, maybe I'll just bring this up because it's decently interesting. Now the federal Conservatives are way out ahead in BC, even though this used to be a far more divided province. In 21, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, in 21, I think technically the Liberals or the NDP slightly edged out the other parties in the popular vote. But then in this leisure poll that just came out yesterday, we have the Conservatives at 50% in BC, and this Abbott data poll, a little bit less hawkish on the numbers, is showing them at 43. I don't think that David Eby can survive in a world where he would require like about 15-16% of conservative federal voters to be still willing to vote for David Eby, despite the fact that Mr. Poilievre and Eby's programs are completely opposite.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, obviously, my party is riding and benefiting from the fact that Pierre Poilivre is so popular. But Poilivre is also popular because there is this rise in people being upset, people who want change, and young people who become more conservative, right? So I mean, it's obviously two phenomena reinforcing each other. So, and it goes back to my point that David Eby isn't John Horgan, right? John Horgan was able to attract those federal Tories because he was a blue-collar NDP. But now that we have a Pond Grey, woke, urban NDP leader in David Eby, then it turns off a lot of people on the island, in the interior, or even in the suburb of Vancouver.
And what you also have seen over time is I think David Eby has just been benefiting from the fact that voters don't change their opinion on a leader and a party overnight. Chris from the Great Canadian Bagel, who also does his own sort of polling models, he always has a very strict time delay on when new polling results are actually going to start affecting the current voting patterns, because a poll doesn't come out tomorrow and that's what people are voting. That's the type of people who are engaged, who are calling on the phone, are going to be voting. So I think that if we see a sustained rise for the BC Conservatives, we can be confident that's not just a fluke where David Eby said something stupid that week and voters who are phoned ended up turning on them. But I wanted to just bring up quickly the last results we saw from the Main Street poll, showing that now the NDP and the Conservatives are tied at 38%, but the BC United are down all the way at 15%. But that wasn't the interesting result for me, because it was more so that it was interesting that we had the BC Conservatives with decided voters that were ahead of the BC NDP, which is really funny because, again, it was just a couple months ago or 3 months ago where you could have the BC NDP at sometimes 18 points above all the other parties, like their next closest party. They were 18 points leading them. And now they are being led in decided voters, which demonstrate that they were just the holding pattern party. And you can this is like the most acute kind of incumbent advantage you can have, that nobody maybe even likes you, but you're ahead. So voters have this bandwagoning mentality that, well, he's going to win anyways. I might as well have an MLA from his party representing my riding. And then right after that, I want to quickly go to the actual individual issues that BC voters are being polled on.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, for the longest time, I think David Eby and the NDP were just riding the high of 2020 and the lack of opposition. So people were not really paying attention. Even nowadays, I go door to door almost every day. And quite frankly, most people don't even know there is a BC election this fall, right? I mean, for, better or worse, the average person focuses less on provincial politics than on federal politics, right? They know there's a federal election coming next year. They don't necessarily know that there is a BC one. So if you don't know there is an election coming up, you don't really, look at anything, and you're not looking to change. So you pack your vote with the party that was leading. But now it's starting to change, and pretty quickly, actually.
That's always the annoying thing. You get that Powerball mentality with people where nobody likes to vote in the elections that their vote actually makes up the largest portion of the voting population in that election. They always vote when like the amount of votes in play are really high. It's like the Powerball, because federal, like you get really serious about federal politics, even though in theory you have the smallest chance of your vote making the difference. But then like nobody votes in municipal elections, and then provincial is kind of this weird in between area. And then of course nominations are just horrifying, where there's like 5 people end up selecting who the MP in their area is going to be for the next 25 years. But anyway, so I want to maybe I'll start off with this one because I thought this was interesting. It really demonstrates the federal provincial divide that I don't think can maintain itself over time. So we have this poll question that was put out by Ledger, and it was, I'm not going to read it, but it was asking BC residents if they supported the Axe the Tax movement that the federal Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilivre has been using against the federal carbon tax. And when he had signed that letter to David Eby, just asking him in the nicest possible way, would you join us in the Axe the Tax movement and remove your provincial tax? And David Eby effectively insulted anyone voting Conservative by saying that, oh, this is just Pierre Poilievre's stupid baloney factory, and I actually do serious politics, and this is all performative. But when you actually poll people on what they want to do with the provincial carbon tax, BC, the province who's had the carbon tax the longest, we have only 29% of people opposing removing the provincial carbon tax. And if unsure voters, the 15% still undecided between supporting and opposing, split the way that we already see people, it's just not going to be like good for the BC NDP, because right now they have to run on a lot of turkeys of issues at the moment. So on screen right here, you can see people being polled on whether the government is doing a good job or a bad job in several issues. And obviously, every government will be doing good on something. It's just naturally how it works out. You poll someone on something frivolous, like right here, relationship with the federal government. Are they doing a good job or a bad job? It's pretty difficult to be doing a bad job on something like that. But then when you go down to healthcare, it's there. 68% of residents are saying the BC government's doing a poor job. Street crime, public safety, 68% doing a poor job. Drug addiction, opioid crisis, 76% say bad job. Cost of living, housing affordability, poverty and homelessness, 78% across the board on all of those. And maybe it'd be good to just like say, have you noticed kind of even a mood in your specific riding where if you talk to somebody about the provincial election and they're actually kind of turned on to what's going on in the race, that they just start talking about healthcare and crime and like the opioid crisis?
Yes, obviously. My rating has like 3 parts, that are quite different from each other in terms of population and voters. There is a big section of my writing around Oak Ridge where, they vote federal Conservative and they used to vote BC Liberals provincially. This is the part where, as soon as you mention taxes and deficit, people open up. And cost of living, obviously everybody does, but when you go more specific and you mention taxes, of course they will talk and they will say they're not happy with it. It's really amazing for us how dogmatic David Eby has been on the carbon tax. I mean, this tax is dead. Everybody hates it. Every premier out there, even liberals ones, don't want it anymore. And we have David Eby who keeps going, is happy to increase it. And we're in a province where we don't even get a full rebate, right? So we don't even have this, phony debate as to whether we pay more or less in carbon tax than we receive. We know we pay more. That's a fact. So it's not surprising to see that British Columbians are willing to change on this. Otherwise, yesterday I talked for a good 5-10 minutes. I wasn't very efficient, but I didn't care. It was an important conversation with an elderly Chinese voter in my writing. And as soon as I went and I introduced myself, she asked me 2 questions, and it was, what's your position on drugs and what's your position on transgender? And as soon as I told her, well, on drugs, we think it has been nonsense. We don't want to give so-called free, safe supply, and we shouldn't just let people do drugs everywhere. Of course, right up, she was right away, she agreed with me. And on transgender, I told her that obviously, this is a complicated issue, but we literally just introduced a bill to make sure that sport is fair between men and women, and that parents should be, should have a say. There should be parental rights, and I'm pretty sure I gained a voter right there in 5 minutes. So this is obviously an issue. My writing, one part is very multi-ethnic with a lot of South Asian voters, and we know for a fact when we talk to them, they don't like the surgery and this radical gender ideology. So that might not be the main element, I mean, for the average voter, but for some voters, it's really, really crucial.
Yeah, and the thing is that's the funny thing is when we go through every single one of these issues, because even though parental rights wasn't on that list we just looked at, from federal polling, we know across the country it's like 80% popular. The concept of parental notification and consent, it's extremely popular, and it demonstrates the media advantage and the kind of cultural momentum advantage you have as a more left-wing party like the NDP. You can be getting squashed on literally every single issue, but there's kind of this like middle class nervousness about opposing the current sort of left wing orthodoxy in the public. And what I thought, and maybe you can say if this is what the impression you got from the NDP, what I thought David Eby was doing by going after Poilievre is he thought it was going to be this great little populist moment where he was going to jab at Pierre and his base was going to get fired up. Oh, he's taking it to the terrible man with no glasses now. Now, like that, it was somehow going to be this thing where he's now stood up to the werewolf and he's coming back to win his provincial election. When I don't think he realized that probably Poilievre is a far more popular and well-liked politician than David Eby is. There's a difference between having a decent approval rating and then actually being liked. That's the funny thing. Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick, second least popular premier in the country, or I think actually the least popular premier in the country. But the people who like him really like him. But when you go to David Eby, second most popular premier in the country, but I don't think you could actually find that many people who are die-hard David Eby fans. They're purely voting for him for pragmatic reasons. And the problem for him, too, is people could easily still go and vote for First to Know and the Greens. That's also why this Abacus data poll, which is a little bit nicer on the NDP federally, that's why this should be terrifying, because the thing is that with 43% of people voting federal conservative, with 9 to 11% of people still voting Green, David Eby is working with less than 40% of voters that he could possibly win. And that's not exactly a guarantee, especially when United and might end up becoming the spoiler party for the NDP. It's kind of like the American presidential election right now, where at times people thought that RFK Jr. is going to be a spoiler for Donald Trump, but now it looks like it's going to be a spoiler for Joe Biden when if the BC Conservatives defund the United of all their more conservative voters, well, then they're just left as the party that you vote for if you're too nervous to vote for the NDP.
No, like exactly that. I'm very glad you mentioned it because, everybody, a lot of people are always telling us, oh, you guys should merge, right? BC Conservative and BC United. How come you guys cannot make a deal? And honestly, they really don't want to, even if you wanted to. So that's the end of the story. But even there, I actually think we're at the point where we benefit from BC United remaining as this small, tiny, Alberta party of BC, where exactly they're gonna get maybe 10, 12%, and essentially all their voters will be federal liberals who don't want to vote for David Eby, but they wouldn't vote for us if the party didn't exist. So, and that's why we see now polls where we're winning in the projections despite BC United not being at zero. So that's a really important factor, I think, and how much of the collapse and how much of the conservative voter of BC United we're able to get. The other factor, to go back to David Eby, is, he did well when he managed to win Vancouver Point Grey in 2013 against Christy Clark, right? And so he won in his riding, and now he's very safe in his riding. But his riding is a pretty good example of those, voters who have realigned over the last 10, 15 years. So, rich urban voters who used to vote, liberals or conservative now vote left, right? I mean, we see it in the States as well, where the Democrats are now winning in Orange County, for instance. And so what I want to say here is David Eby has done well with a specific demographic. He has never been tested versus the general population. The only time we could have had a look at how good he was doing with everybody was the leadership race, but then they rigged it in such a way that he was the only candidate and he just got acclaimed. So he never had to go win suburban voters or people on the island or people in the interior. So he's completely untested, and I'm not super confident he can really win those voters. He has already toned down his activist, radical, persona that he used to have like 15 years ago.
He's
But
literally wrote books on how you can sue the police for frivolous reasons to get money back.
yes, exactly. I mean, I think the David Eby back then would hate the David Eby of today, but even the David Eby of today is still, exactly. You still see this radicalism. You see it when he gets rid of a Jewish cabinet minister because the radical members of his party don't want her to be in the
The
cabinet,
biggest
right?
mistake of this week almost is him even trying to recognize Passover. It's like, dude, David. It's like, or it's like Jewish Heritage Month. It's like, David, shut up. Just put the phone down. Stop tweeting. Like the thing is, you're gonna remind people of what you did. Same thing with Jagmeet Singh and like the NDP voting in favor of Hamas. Just don't do it. There's just so many negatives. But the funny thing is, remember when David Eby was first in, and he was thinking about scrapping like safe supply and decriminalization altogether. And then his radical base clubbed him back into line. Because this is why now, when he's trying to kind of walk back decriminalization a little bit, one, it's just pathetic. He's like, guys, please don't use meth right in front of the school. Just do it like across the street in front of that poor woman's house. Like that's effectively what he's telling people to do with the new, like, just don't use drugs in public parks. It literally changes nothing. There is like 1% of land now in any given town or city that you're no longer allowed to smoke crack on. And he lets people in camp in these parks, even though that's illegal. And so the idea that he's actually going to enforce these laws is insane. But the thing is, he also has no credibility on it because he has said he's made noises about moderating before, and then his radical base pushed him back into line because he is in such a bubble of these are the only people he talks to. So they 100% of them said, what are you doing, David? Why aren't you giving free drugs to people anymore? And then he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I was being so conservative. And then he went back to where he was at. So now when he's like, he's not even going as far into moderating as he was pretending to a year and a half ago. And so now it just looks like he's just basically conceding that John Rustad and the BC Conservatives are right. And then he's not going to do anything on the issue because nobody's going to remember on voting day. Oh, remember when he started trying to walk back decriminalization? Well, that was a really good, moderate, mature move because it will have no effect by election day. There's not going to be people, you're not going to be walking around the streets and noticing fewer drugs and needles everywhere.
This is especially the case, right? Because we know the modern left is so obnoxious, right, on those issues, right? And so just 6 months ago, just 4 months ago, when people like me were saying we shouldn't give free drugs to people, not only they were against us, but they would mock us, right? They would be like, oh, you guys really don't know anything. You need to follow the science. You need to listen to the experts. And so they were so strong, so up there, themselves, so into themselves until very recently that people remember this. So now, if you switch back and you say, oh, but we've asked the federal government to recriminalize drugs. I mean, A, you look like you flip-flop, and B, as you said, people will not forget. You have zero credibility on this issue, especially against a party like mine, where we have been consistent throughout, right? And it's really helping us at this issue right now because both the NDP and the BC United, I mean, they used to be all in on decriminalization. And now they're all pretending that they are not in favor and, they want to do this common sense. I mean, we talk a lot about David Eby, but Kevin Falcon is way more pathetic on this issue. I mean, because we have recording of him just like 9 months ago going on a talk show and saying, oh, yeah, of course, this is a good idea. And now all of a sudden he saw the polls in the fall and he decided to rebrand himself as this common sense conservative. And that doesn't work. This is really hilarious. Every time I see him trying to ride the Poilivre train because he has zero credibility, and we know he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. He's a liberal at heart. His number two, Michael Lee, who is my opponent in the riding, is the same. He has been so quiet on this issue. Usually he's very, he's with Kevin Falcon and his party all the time. They make sure to bring him along. And all of a sudden, we never see him on any of those issues. Where there was the big fight in Richmond to prevent a safe injection site, he wasn't there, even though every time it's something that affects the Chinese community, he would be there. So, this tells me that, at heart, he actually wants decriminalization. He wants the safe supply. He's a liberal on those issues. And he's very uncomfortable with the phony switch of his party.
maybe you can answer me this, because when I don't live in British Columbia, it's just confusing looking at how the BC United operates. Because in these polls, like the BC United has 15%, then with Decide voters, even if you identify them as the Liberal Party, because that's the party people know them better as, only 16% people like who is the BC United voter at this point, and are they still willing to cross over to the Conservatives, or is this more so just become the receptacle for like federal Liberals?
So I think it's mostly two type of people. The first type is the George Charest type of conservative voter. You know, the one where during the leadership in 2022, they would go on Twitter and be super annoying, be like, "Oh, if Poilivre wins, I will, cancel my membership. I cannot vote for such a populist leader." And so you have a few of these people who, again, if the party didn't exist, they would most likely stay home, or they would vote David Eby before they vote for John Restad. So you have those, they exist, high income or highly educated or urban voters who I think will not want to switch. The second group, which I think can be persuaded to switch, would be visible minorities, where just because of the name and the traditions and the links they historically had, they still vote for the liberals. I mean, do they know that the liberals don't exist and they're named BC United? I'm not sure. But this is one, part of the electorate which I think they still have to some extent. Not a majority, but a significant share. And so we're working hard on getting this share of the voters, whether it's the Jewish population in BC or, as I mentioned, the South Asian population, where they vote in group usually, and they might not have changed their mind yet, but it's changing. I think we can feel it on when we go door knocking and when we go to events.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you go door knocking, do you still would you ask anyone who they're voting for, and do you ever have people still say BC Liberal because they don't know who the BC United Party even is?
So, and this is a true story. I've done knock now, for weeks. I've literally only had one person telling me they would vote liberals, and actually, they told me, "Oh no, in this household we vote liberal." And I said, "Oh yeah, but just to confirm, there is no liberals in at the provincial level." He said, "Oh yeah, no, but the other one, the United." So that's the only voter I've found that told me this. So I don't know if they even know it has changed. I think
United's also just such a limp name. I don't even know why you would go to United. I don't know who this appeals to. Because in Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan United Party is the more conservative party than the Saskatchewan Party. And so it's such a throwaway name. Anything could be United. It's like we're gonna lose the election. Let's at least pretend like it's a brand that a consultant would come up with, that let's throw United in the name because it will make people feel unified and united. And whenever I look at Calvin Falconson's or Kevin Falcon, I don't know how to say his last name, sorry. But
yeah.
whenever I see whenever I see the advertisements that his party's putting out, it just feels like limp. Like he's just assuming that it's not a leadership race, where by being the most boring man in the room that you're going to get everyone's number 2 votes. Like maybe he's hoping that David Eby wants to switch to some ranked ballot right before the election. But like with the BC United embarrassing themselves every time a new poll comes out and says we're doing 3% better in this one than the other one, and they're like down at like 14% or whatever. I don't know what's like possessing these people. Their social media, they'll post something, it'll get 4 likes,
Yeah.
and they're still using the same old media accounts as the Liberal Party, so they have a lot of followers, and there'll be like 200 comments just roasting them. I don't like. Are they getting towards the end of their war chest? Because I've been hearing they're spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising themselves. I assume it's because people don't even know who they are anymore. But do you get any suspicion that this is convincing people, or are they eventually just going to run out of money?
No, it's not convincing anybody. And when you say it's confusing of what they're trying, well, yeah, it is. But it's because, again, I think Kevin Falcon, when he came back and he won the leadership, he really thought that the right strategy was to do the Erin O'Toole strategy of being in the center and kind of upsetting everybody. And he bases his entire strategy, including renaming the party, for this. But so it didn't work, and so all of a sudden, 4 months ago, they decided to pivot and be this conservative party. We see it in like certain ways, right? When they revealed their new logo, it was a lot of teal and pink, right, to be new, and it looked like an insurance logo. But if you look at their recent marketing, they're going with the dark blue to try to appear more conservative. So this is a party that most likely, would have
The
believed
BC
in
NDP also threw
2021.
some blue in their logo recently.
Yeah. So this is a party. Those are people who believe that to win election, you had to be united, but you had to kick John Russell out for making a small tweet about climate change. So, they never wanted to actually unite the right. They wanted to force the right to be with them because they had no options. So it doesn't work. And where they're going, I will be honest. I mean, until recently, I was kind of scared they would come back because they are the party. We've seen the BC Conservative rising in the polls before, and then by election day, we would have collapse. And I always thought, we wouldn't collapse as much because we now organized. We're going to have 93 candidates. But there was always this chance that BC United would all of a sudden become the alternative, like the option that people would consider. I don't think so. I think by now this is lost. And, they spent $1 million in ads in February and March. And I remember we were talking in the party just before, like, well, let's weather the storm and let's see where we are in April. If we're back to 15%, then, it's going to be difficult. If we're still at 25 above them, it's going to be great. And, they spent $1 million on really limpy ads and nothing happened. Well, actually, they went from 18 to 15.
I really liked the ad where he's like looking out over a pier, and it looks like this moment in a movie when the hero's just given up or something like that, and he doesn't feel like there's a way forward. Like all of their ads, he's filming on some dark, cloudy day or whatever. But it's what happens when you let consultants run your party. It's like when Aaron O'Toole was the federal Conservative Party leader. They assume that being inoffensive means that they're liked when that's not really how it works. And every single move that they make is being uninteresting. And that's why they're voting with the BC Conservatives on some issues and they jump back. They're thinking that they're the ones who can't be blamed for anything because they took no hard stances. But taking no hard stances means that everyone thinks that you're also unreliable. Like voters vote for a feeling of safety and stability, and there's nothing safe about United. It just feels like, again, like you're not even insurance company is too flattering because at least your insurance company doesn't. It feels like that dental office down the road that you've never visited is just a weak and kind of soulless marketing. And they swung and missed so hard when Aaron Gunn was willing to run as their leader. And then they had Ellis Ross as the other option after Aaron Gunn was kicked out. I think even Aaron Gunn was endorsing Ellis Ross. Like he was being very classy about the fact that the party basically just kicked him in the pants and told him to get lost. And they completely missed the zeitgeist of politics. And it's not because there's this big populist wave or something like that. No, it's just that people expect you to make actual changes, not just running on the change brand where we just say change and nothing actually changes. But I need you to state on the record, I'm going to end safe supply. I'm going to end decriminalization. I'm going to lower taxes. I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. Because Vancouver, like Toronto, and just talking about the main cities, has benefited from just being big, from being the big city on the West Coast and the East Coast. Now that's really not good enough because there are much better cities to invest in the US. And so if you're in a down economy, going to think that you can just have high taxes and bring people to your city just simply because it's a big hub is just not true anymore. We've seen cities collapse in the past when they basically their usefulness ended. Detroit is a great example. You can be the manufacturing hub, but if you chase all the manufacturers out, you're not going to be bringing people by reputation alone. Seattle's not that far away. There's places you can move your tech company to. And now that's the funny thing, is that the NDP and United brands would represent destroying everything that their main voter base works within in terms of the white collar downtown Vancouver jobs. They are actively asking their voters if they'd like to be unemployed.
No, that's completely true. And to go back to Kevin Falcon, there's also the issue that this is somebody that left politics in 2012 or 2013, right? So I think we saw it with Josh Hare when he came back. Those former leaders or politicians who left before social media was the way it is nowadays, I don't think they're cut out for politics anymore. They come back and they look very rusty and they don't know what to do. And it doesn't help Kevin Falcon that all the talent in his party is gone. It's either gone to us, to Ken Sim and ABC at the mayor's office, or with Pierre Poilivre at the federal level. So, they're now using the B or C team. And so I'm really not surprised now, when you think about it, to see that they're not making any wave, or they're not able to generate anything on social media. And to go back to your argument, this idea that the NDP and is going against its voters, or the people who are now voting for, not traditional voters, but the people who are voting for them at the seat. Yeah, no, we see it. And I think, we saw in the mayoral election last year where Vancouver, who is quite progressive, quite overall, elected a technically right-wing, right of the center mayor, right? And so, Ken Sim is centrist overall, but he did run a campaign that was on the right, and he won really, really big. So there is this, people who are just unhappy. We see it in San Francisco right now, where whether they have an election or referendum, people just had enough, right? At some point,
Yeah,
we
they
need
got
to
rid of
remember
Chase
that
Boudin as the DA.
those super progressive, woke, virtue signaling voters, they exist, but they're overrepresented on Twitter and in the consultancy class. At the end of the day, most voters are still normals, right? They're normies. And they don't like to see drugs next to their playground. They don't like to see crime. They don't like to see, traffic everywhere. So, when it's time to vote, even them will won't change at some point.
And change in action in office, depending on the issue, sometimes changes can happen really fast. But when you're actually making bills and you're passing policy, oftentimes change has to be incremental, that you see the improvement over multiple years. That's just how it is. I know a lot of voters don't like that. That's just how it works. When you have to balance off interest groups, you have to do a lot of consulting of the community and all that, and it just takes forever to implement stuff. But the thing is, voters do not usually want incremental change by how they vote. This is where, in even my city of Calgary, the reason why we keep ending up with left-wing mayors is because the Conservatives who run against them think that, well, Nenshi was just the mayor, Dave Bronconier was just the mayor, or Gondek is now the mayor now. Well, we just have to be a little bit more conservative than her and then kind of represent the improvement. It's like, no. If you actually want to win as a party or a candidate against a incumbent unpopular left-winger, you can't just be the cautious, slightly center-right conservative, because it feels kind of flavorless. Like it's merely saying you're basically hoping that there's just enough people who say no to the other person and then happen to vote for you. Where if you actually want to win, you actually sometimes need to be an out-of-the-box party and out-of-the-box candidate. That's where Rob Ford wins Toronto's mayoral race back in the day, because there's no question that he is the most conservative man in the room, and he represents the biggest difference between the current government and now, while also getting things done. That's the difference between United and the BC Conservatives. The BC Conservatives actually feel like a full-throated way of saying, I want something different than the current government, where you have to be in a really weird frame of mind to think, oh, I hate the NDP, but let's not go crazy with the changes here. And I like safe supply just a little bit less. Like, it's the type of voter who's convinced by David Eby just saying, don't do heroin in the park. But there's not many voters who actually think that way. If anything, either if you actually don't not support decriminalization, you still want it to keep around, you probably are of the mind that it needs to be doubled in size. Well, it's just safe supply hasn't been gone far enough. It's like the Thomas Sowell book, Visions of the Anointed. Once your current plan fails, it's never because the plan sucked. It's because either the people were bad or because the plan wasn't quite big enough. And imagine all the damage that could have been caused if we didn't do the plan in the first place, even though things got worse. It would have just been twice as worse unless we had done this. And that's the thing with safe supply. I saw David Eby talk about it 2 days ago, saying, well, we've saved so many lives, because think about, we've increased or decreased the per capita death to overdose ratio, but the denominator of overdose has gone up significantly. It's been how many overdoses? Maybe a couple hundred a day to tens of thousands of potential overdoses a day. And so, yes, someone's having to OD 7 or 8 times before they die because of all the government services out there to administer whatever that fentanyl drug is, I'm Narcan, or anything else like that, or having paramedics out there helping people, but that doesn't actually mean anyone's better off. That just means that we have papered over what everything bad happening. Again, it's like the George Carlin joke that we just use soft language to hide real problems, that we have safe supply, we have, a compassionate intervention where we have all this stuff like that, but you're not actually making anyone healthier or preventing them from dying. You're just papering over the fact that they're poisoning themselves.
But, this is typical of the woke left, right? I mean, they love virtue signaling. They're really good at owning the language, right? And setting up the rules of the game. And they really love what looks like simple solutions but when we dig, they don't work, right? So whether it's for safe supply, I will always go back to anything that has to do with education, right? Because obviously I care a lot about this as an instructor in a college, where I see the new kids who come, and I just had a meeting with all the economics department of the province, and we all said the same. We said the level in math, for instance, is terrible nowadays. And, the woke left is responsible for this, the progressives, because what they have done over the last, 20 years is they started saying, math is racist, or, math is not, there is a lack of equity if you do tests. And so it's the same logic, right? I mean, they're going to pretend that they want to help. And to be fair, they might really want to help. The problem is the solutions they come up with are completely absurd, nonsensical, and it's just a band-aid. It's just virtue signaling out there. So what do they do in math? They're going to remove honor classes, or they're going to remove grades from math classes, so that you don't have the worst student feeling bad because they're doing worse than, the really, really good students. So I think this is just very symptomatic on everything as to what the woke left is doing and why this is going so badly, and why the West Coast is doing so badly in general, where it's a reckoning of what happens when these people are actually in power.
Yeah, well, they're pure materialists, and that's why all their solutions are always focusing on the material aspect of the problem, not the actual mentality and the culture or the philosophy towards something. It's that people just don't have safe enough drugs, or they don't have enough voluntary detox resources out there, when the problem is people are becoming addicted in the first place. And they're always shocked that whenever you create incentives for more risky behavior, or safety nets for more risky behavior, that you have more people engaging in risky behavior. And you're entirely correct about math. I survived Alberta when we had what we called discovery math, in which I have every progressive teacher say, it's not a curriculum, it's just a pedagogy. But then all the new teachers do it because they do whatever they were taught in school. And what they were effectively doing was trying to teach all students math the way a child with genuine ADHD would need to be taught, with very broken down steps, like 15 steps to learning a logarithmic problem. And so I'm so confused halfway through the question, because it's been 30 minutes and we haven't done one question, and I don't even know what we're even doing anymore, because we're like talking about the concept of numbers halfway through and what numbers mean. Like, that's great if you're someone who has just a way of thinking where you need everything really, really well explained and defined, but it destroyed my ability to know math. So I even almost had to take -1, the high school math, over again, because that's another issue. We had, like, everyone in my class was like, there's like 15 people in my class, and they were all like crazy good at math. And my teacher had the idea that everything has to be a 60% bell curve, which just meant kicking me in the corner. But regardless, I still experienced that, and it's just a horrible way of doing it. But that was a bit of a weird tangent on the way out of this, but I won't keep you here too much longer. But I wanted to show on screen what your riding is. So, guys, if you live in this part of Vancouver, this is where Bryan Breguet is running.
That's the old map, by the way. I mean, the new map is almost the same, but a little bit, it goes less high in the north. But so it wasn't a big change with the new map. But so
okay, fair enough. Well, that's probably good for you anyways. But if you still live in just the south area of Vancouver, Bryan, I'll put your link to your BC Conservative profile page in the description below. So if anyone in Vancouver wants to come out door knocking with Bryan, wants more information on what he's doing, you should reach out to him, or just reach out to the party. I'll put the BC Conservatives social media accounts in the description as well. But is there any sort of things that you think that are needed right now? Like, do you guys need more volunteers, and how is the actual situation on the ground going with material?
Yeah, so exactly. So we can always use more volunteers, more donations, right? I mean, our fundraising is doing fine, right, overall, and we have increased quite a lot compared to last year, but we're still a little bit behind the BC United, and especially the BC NDP, right? I mean, we know left wing parties or like the Democrats in the States, they're pretty good at fundraising nowadays because they have their high income, consultancy class voters. So, I mean, anything helps, right? Even like just if you live in BC, you have to live in BC, right? You donate. But even if you just donate $100, you get $75 back in tax credit. So it really only costs you $25, and it goes a long way, right? I mean, $100
Does that go all the way
is,
up to 400? That it's the 75 back?
no, the 75 is only for the first 100.
Oh,
After this, I think it falls to 50% or something like this for the
yeah.
next 400 or 500. But so it's still interesting, but not as good of a deal as the first
Yeah.
100.
And I will say this as somebody who has donated hundreds of dollars to nomination campaigns where I have gotten $0 in tax credits back and donated like maxed out donations when I was literally 20 years old. More people have to donate to the parties because people don't realize that, like, well, I don't want to have to give $50. They should just go out and work harder for free. It's like, guys, you're going to be paying more in taxes if the NDP gets back in. So you will legitimately, it's the best investment you can make if you live in BC to donate $100 to the party so you don't go bankrupt yourself. But
So let's conclude on this. So just to give an idea of how bad our public finances are in BC, the deficit is so large and the debt is rising so much that Trevor Toom, right, from the University of Calgary, who is not an economist that is very right-wing, he's usually associated with the Liberals. But
he was my research project supervisor for my master's degree.
Really, I love the guy. He's
Yeah,
really, really great. But he's not known to be like a super extreme
Yeah,
conservative
he's very down middle.
economist. And even he, like a month ago, when he wrote about BC, he said that essentially to go back to a balanced budget, we need to raise the PST, our provincial sales tax, from 7% to 21%. So yeah, so when you say people, should think about this, because if we don't win and the NDP, wins again this fall, then yeah, I'm not saying your PST will go up to 21% in November, but this is what would be required if you allow David Eby to play with your tax money longer.
Well, the PST that your kids will be paying will be 21%. So
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
more people should think about it that way. And right now, like especially with the housing market in British Columbia, it is a federal issue because of immigration, but still, the BC government has not been playing very nicely with homeowners or anyone who actually wants to own. If you own a home, it's great for you in a certain sense, but if you actually want to own a home, it's been awful. But yeah, thanks, Bryan, for showing up onto the show and talking about the polls here today. Hopefully, people liked this interview format. I'll definitely have on more BC Conservative candidates in the future, and hopefully maybe even John Rustad at some point. But until next time, guys, make sure you go check out the BC Conservatives information and see if you can get involved in any way. Donate, because again, also for the rest of Canada to go back to normal, we can't have the BC NDP treating the province of BC like the meth lab for all terrible progressive policies that eventually go around the rest of the country. Gondek is trying to import Vancouver policies to Calgary, and Toronto is trying to do the same thing with safe supply and decriminalization. But anyways, see you guys all later, and I'll be back with another video soon.